Welcome back to the Board of County Commissioners and Clackamas of the May 4th policy sessions for the afternoon. Gary, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Yes, it is still May 4th. May the 4th be with you. Star Wars Day, I have to say that. Thank you. Our first session today, your first session, is Metro disposal fees and related Metro budgeting. We have staff from Metro here and our Transportation and Development staff who will kick it off. Dan Johnson, Director of Transportation and Development. Please go ahead, Dan.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair Smith, members of the Commission, and County Administrator Schmidt. I'm Dan Johnson, Director of Transportation and Development. I'm here today to introduce Metro staff who've been invited to provide a presentation on disposal fees and their related budget, and would like to take a couple of minutes to set the stage. In Clackamas County, you, as our board, oversee collection for about 59,000 unincorporated residents, commercial users, providing about 8.2 million pickups of garbage, recycling, yard debris, and food scraps each year. As you know, our garbage collectors deliver waste to several transfer stations where they pay a disposal fee that covers the cost to get the waste to a landfill, plus regional fees and taxes. 2 of those transfer stations are owned by Metro. Disposal costs constitute about 20% of the cost of our overall collection service rate that we established. As Metro Council considered these increases, the prior board sent a letter on December 15th, and that letter stated, "It's critical that Metro demonstrate sensitivity to the impact of fee increases on our community members and garbage and recycling customers. The size of this increase leads us to ask for more information and transparency from Metro about the rationale for and uses of the proposed increase, and how it will be used to benefit communities around the region. When considering increases of this magnitude, Clackamas County requests that Metro engage further with the county and their local governments, seeking consensus and input, and we invite you to share more with us." A letter that came from the Board of County Commissioners to Metro. Based upon this letter, Metro accepted our invitation, which leads us here to today's presentation. It's also important to point out that in today's presentation, Metro will share how they determine their rates, which is the tipping fees. But this presentation is not related to your recent adoption of the new solid waste fee ordinance that altered how garbage collection fees are to be adjusted if their potential future Metro rates are reduced. In addition, I want to make sure we're clear, we're not discussing any rate increases on Clackamas County's behalf today at all. Those impacts that Metro will be discussing with you today, in addition to a number of other factors, are currently being assessed through our annual fee review process, which will be brought to the board in May and June for further discussion. This policy session is simply to focus on the process and the content of Metro's disposal fee and related budgets. And with that, today in person are Roy Brower, if you could come on up, and Brian Kennedy from Metro. But first, I'd like to turn it over to Metro COO, Marisa Madrigal.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair Smith and Clackamas County Commissioners. My name is Marisa Madrigal. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Metro. I'm delighted to be here with you today. Thank you for the invitation to share a little bit more about the work that we do and provide a little transparency. We are absolutely committed to making sure that you and the public understand what you get in return for the rates that are paid, and look forward to an ongoing dialogue about how we can best serve your constituents, which are our constituents as well across the region. Before I turn this over to Roy Brower, our Director of Solid Waste and Environmental Services, and Brian Kennedy, our CFO, I wanted to just address something slightly unrelated but important to your county. We have recently had an experience that has impacted some of your constituents who work at our Metro South transfer station and we are investigating a potential act of hate with a rope that was found in the shape of a noose. We have an ongoing investigation happening, so I can't say much more than that, provide many more details. But I did also want to share that Councilor Gonzalez and I visited the site on Friday and had a chance to talk to frontline workers. And I think, troublingly, they are, to a person, experiencing some pretty egregious behavior from members of the public who are visiting our station. and are at the receiving end, have been regularly at the receiving end of comments and name calling from some members of the public. We see a lot of people at our transfer stations, so I'm in no way saying that there are, that everyone is doing this, but there have been enough things said that have been hurtful, damaging, and overtly racist that I thought it was important for you to know that this is occurring, and to also just ask for your support in condemning that kind of behavior. It's been a very difficult year for folks in our country, and certainly in our community, even more so for frontline workers. And so any support that we could have in asking people to treat others with dignity and respect in our interactions would be very, very much appreciated.
I'm going to interject for one moment.
Absolutely.
Did you call the police? Did
We
your
did.
people call the police? You know, this is the first time that this board or any of our administrator or county council has heard of these accusations. And you're really putting us on the spot at the moment. You know, a common courtesy might have been when these actions occurred to let us know, and then we could have had time to address them properly and in the manner in which these accusations came forward. So you have really put my board in a difficult position with this surprise information today.
My apologies, Chair Smith. That was not my intention at all. These were events that were widely reported in the media last week.
Does any of our board know about this?
Negative.
Not, I take exception, none of us have known about this. Widely reported, we didn't hear about it. County Council, Stephen, did you hear about it?
No, Chair, I'm not familiar with it.
My county administrator has not. I don't believe any of our board members were, but if you want to, this is a horrid occurrence. And of course, we do not condone these actions. But if you would like to continue with a good working relationship between these two departments, maybe more of a conciliatory nature towards this type of action would be warranted in giving us a heads up.
I understand.
And I'm sure we will have comments, but I think that we will have to discuss with county council and our administrator on how to move ahead on this. And there's no place for this. Absolutely, there's no place for this, assuming that it's true. We don't know what happened. We have to just rely on what you have told us today, and that is grossly unfair, don't you think?
Ma'am, I in no way intended to, place blame for the incidents at our transfer station on the Clackamas County Commission, nor would I expect that you would condone behavior of this type. And my sincere apologies for, providing information that you had not received before. And certainly I'm happy to have a separate discussion and share what I know. Yes, my apologies.
What's up next? What's up next in the presentation?
If I might, we do have a presentation on our rates and on our budgeting process. And for that, I will turn it over to Roy Brower, our director.
Okay, thank you for that, Chair Smith and Commissioners. Thank you for having us here today. You can go to the next slide, please. So Metro has had a role in solid waste since the 1970s, when we used to run the scale house at the old St. John's landfill until it closed in the early 90s. That time we established a system of transfer stations and long-haul transportation to a regional landfill in eastern Oregon in Gilliam County. Metro South in Oregon City was built in the early 1980s as the first of those transfer stations. Metro is authorized by state law and our charter to acquire, develop, and maintain and operate facilities for the disposal of solid waste. Metro does not have authority to collect solid waste. That is reserved to cities and counties, such as Clackamas. Metro does set the minimum standards for the collection services throughout the region, so there's some similarity if you move from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. The garbage and recycling system appears to be roughly the same. Next slide, please. As has been stated, Metro runs 2 public transfer stations, 2 household hazardous waste collection facilities, and we conduct mobile collection events throughout the region. Those were suspended, however, this last year due to COVID. We're hoping to restart those later this year. Metro also operates a paint recycling facility, monitors and cares for the old St. John's landfill, and operates an illegal dump cleanup program known as RID, or the Regional Illegal Dumping Program. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little perspective on what we did in 2019, sort of hard to report on 2020. That was such an anomalous year. Metro oversaw 1.3 million tons of garbage being moved from the region to landfills, another 1.1 million tons of material being recovered or recycled. Metro facilities directly moved 500,000 tons brought in by 410,000 customers. We cleaned up 4,000 dump sites, collected 17,000 sharps, sold 199,000 gallons of recycled paint, and provided assistance to 250,000 people in either a classroom setting or through calls to our recycling information center. So that's just to give you a little bit of a perspective on the solid waste program that Metro runs. Brian Kennedy, our CFO, is here to talk a little bit about rates and our budget.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Chair Smith and County Commissioners. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. Let's go to the next slide. So Metro charges fees to 2 major groups: customers at Metro transfer stations and then all regional ratepayers. So the customers at Metro transfer stations pay transaction fees and tonnage charges, and then all ratepayers in the system pay the regional system fee, the Metro excise tax, DEQ fees, and community enhancement fees. Next slide, please. So where does the money go? So customers at Metro transfer stations generate about $45 million for operations of those transfer stations. The majority of those costs go to operating contracts at Metro Central and Metro South, waste transport, and waste disposal fees at the landfill. On the regional program side, we generate around $36 million a year in the regional system fee. Those funds go to a wide variety of programs and services, including household hazardous waste, the regional illegal dumping program, and other waste reduction programs. So both of these 2 categories of fees are governed by state law and are restricted to only be used for solid waste services and activities. Additionally, ratepayers in the region pay around $18 million a year in the Metro excise tax, which goes to fund general government operations. It's really important to note that for all of our fees, the Metro Charter requires that our fees cannot be higher than the actual cost of service. So we make sure that we are carefully tracking those actual costs and not charging in addition to that. Next slide, please. So I want to provide some historical context on Metro's rates. This chart shows that Metro's tipping fees have been essentially flat for the last decade and have even declined twice in the last 10 years. You can also see that the last time we saw significant increases in Metro fees was coming out of the Great Recession. Next slide. On this slide, you can see the relationship of solid waste tonnage and Metro's rates. The bars on this chart show both tonnage at Metro facilities and private facilities. The green line shows the total tip fee. You can see as tonnage was declining coming out of the Great Recession, Metro's tip fee increased. but as tonnage increased regionally, Metro's rate leveled out. Next slide. So moving on to the rate-setting process, we start by determining our revenue requirement. And again, based on our charter, that cannot be more than the actual cost of services. The second piece of our rate-setting process is using a tonnage forecast to estimate activity over the next fiscal year. Next slide. So when we look at rates for fiscal year 22, there were several factors that were driving that revenue requirement. Those included investments in green fuel, improved wages, less polluting equipment, and additional staff to improve safety, customer safety at Metro South. It's really important to note that those cost drivers do not include the cost of new public facilities. Next slide, please. So in looking at rates for next fiscal year, the Metro Council took a balanced approach. In the current fiscal year, the solid waste budget was reduced by $15 million, recognizing the impact of the pandemic. The council is also using 50%, up to 50% of Metro's rate stabilization fund in order to mitigate those rate impacts. Now, the final piece was an increase in transaction fees, tonnage charges, and the regional system fee. But it's also important to note that rates were not increased in the current fiscal year, even though many of these same cost drivers were in place. The rate increase was originally delayed due to the pandemic and then deferred until July 1st of 2021 at the request of our local government and industry partners out of concerns for adopting rates outside the normal fiscal year cycle. Next slide, please. If you want to look at reserves, our solid waste reserves coming into this fiscal year were nearly $49 million. It's important to note that a significant portion of those are restricted by law for landfill closure and pollution remediation. Additionally, many of our reserves are restricted by policy for investment in new capital at our existing transfer stations, as well as maintaining those capital facilities. And again, I should note, the current rates assume drawing down that rate stabilization reserve of approximately $7.5 million, or 50% of the total. Next slide, please. So these are the rates that were adopted by the Metro Council in December to go into effect on July 1st, 2021. Overall, it's a $16.80 increase for customers at Metro facilities. Customers at private transfer stations will see the increase in the regional system fee and the excise tax. Next slide, please. The fee increase also includes changes to our transaction fees and the minimum charge at our transfer station. The increase in these fees is primarily driven by the significant increase in self-haul traffic we're seeing mostly at Metro South, but also to a lesser extent at Metro Central. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for the region? So this fee increase, along with those other budgetary decisions, mean that we will maintain current operations at Metro facilities, particularly maintaining the same open days and open hours. There will be some reduction in regional programs and services. This these rates do fully fund our operating reserve, which is set at 45 days of expenditures, but it does draw down the rate stabilization reserve, as I previously mentioned. These rates do not include any investments in new public facilities, though we do have plans for potential land acquisition out of reserves that have been set aside in prior years for this purpose. Finally, we estimate that the impact on a residential customer with a 35-gallon cart, they'd see a rate impact of around 90 cents per month. Next slide. There are some changes in the proposed budget that has been presented to the Metro Council. Those include some new investments in expansions of the RID Patrol, continuation of the Investment and Innovation Grant Program, funds for system facilities planning, and then ongoing capital investments in our existing properties to help maintain their useful life. And with that, I am done with the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, sir. On your rate increase impact slide, there's a line that says reduction in some regional programs and services, what would that be?
Commissioner Scholl, it has to do mostly with cutting back on our call center hours. We haven't yet started our our household hazardous waste collection events yet this year, mostly due to the pandemic, but those are going to start up, we hope, later in the year if we can do it safely and according to OSHA and CDC requirements, but there will be fewer of those. So those are the kinds of programs that will be scaled back a bit this year.
I see. Thank you.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I got a few questions. So what percentage of the loads that go through South Station, for example, go and leave and get charged the minimum because they're underweight?
I don't know that number off the top of my head. Do you, Roy?
I'll put it this way. We take two kinds of customers there. We take commercial customers, so the normal garbage trucks that go around and collect garbage in, homes and businesses, and then self-haul. Self-haul are the ones who typically pay the minimum $27 or $35 under the new proposal. And those just get consolidated with the commercial loads, and then they go into a compactor. Compactor is filled, gets up to weight about 33 tons, and then it's taken to the gorge for disposal. I don't know if that answers.
Well, here a couple weeks ago, I was getting rid of some fence boards, so I filled the back of my truck up, a pretty heavy load of fence boards, and I went to McFarlane's and dumped it. And the person walked over and said, you can't leave this here. It was some pressure-treated boards that I had, posts and so forth. So I didn't have that many. So I go to South Station, and with my light load, pretty light load, long line, a lot of traffic, and I paid my $28 for that, and I realized I really didn't change the weight of my truck very much. But the point is, I just wondering how many people leave there, because when I'm just trying to understand, just mathematically, that if in your comments that because the volume is so high at South Station, you have to increase the cost. And being a business person my whole life, when I had my greatest amount of business activity, I made my most amount of money. So if I had ever had an opportunity to say I could reduce my prices, that would be under high volume. So I'm just kind of, what part of it are you losing on? And I'm kind of wondering why that is, how that's backfilled, and why the need to raise the minimum from $28 to $35 for these light loads. If you have to charge no more than, what was your words? Not charge more than the actual cost. I'm just curious, because almost every time I've been there, I have a light load. And I never pay any more than the minimum.
That's an excellent question, Commissioner Savas. I think that the important thing to note here is for those self-haul customers, those are our most expensive customers to serve. They require the most staff interaction in terms of navigating through the transfer station to get to the point to dispose of their waste. They are using the staff scale, so interacting with a human being, making their payment. And so it costs more to serve those customers. And a lot of that cost is fixed. So we have the same cost if they show up, whether they have one board in the back of their pickup truck or, a whole trailer full of garbage.
Right. It just seems that if you have so much volume through there right now, that this would be the time to reduce the cost, not raise them, because you have so much volume. So if you let's just say you run 100 self-hauls an hour under normal, and then you peak at 150, you're not adding any staff for the extra 50 on a big day, let's say. That ought to really result in a cost reduction or a revenue generator, as opposed to a need to raise the prices. If, again, the policy is not to charge more than the actual cost.
But I think we did have to add staff to handle those customers.
Yeah, if I could just add, Commissioner Savas, we did have to add additional staff to manage the traffic, the increased traffic. About 80% of the customers that come to Metro South are the self-haul customers, the smaller customers. And while we are proposing to raise the price from $28 8 to 35. I don't think you can find a better deal anywhere in the region. There may be some places outside the region where you can find a better deal, but I know if you go to like Hillsborough landfill or, well, the private transfer stations don't take self-haul customers, so the only place in the region or close to the region is Hillsborough landfill, and it would be easily twice that, in the $70 to $100 range.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand it, and I was fascinated by the packet. So I'd love to see basically whether with a flow chart or pictorial of how the rates, how the tipping fees tie into all of this, and how, you know, if you were to take all the different costing factors and how that comes into the rates. I'd just love to better understand your methodology, frankly, how you get there.
We would be happy to share our rate model. It's a very complicated spreadsheet with, I don't know, 50 tabs of data, but we're happy to share that.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm used to that, so. That's all I have.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none? Who is that?
Commissioner Fisher.
Fisher?
So I'm just a little bit confused. I'm wanting to have you tell me this like very precisely. So I'm looking at attachment 1, which talks about the existing transaction fees and the projected transaction fees and the difference. And some of them look to be quite substantial increases. But then in the PowerPoint, it's a 90 cents a month projected increase. So I'm just curious, it just doesn't compute in my brain how all of these, seems like some are substantial. Some of them are 47.5% difference in the transaction fees and some of the other things. How does that all compute to 90 cents?
That's an
Or
excellent.
did I hear that, am I understanding that correctly?
No, you are understanding that correctly, Commissioner Fisher. The first thing to remember is that the costs at Metro transfer stations and the regional system fee, if you're at a private transfer station, on average around the region, only account for about 20% of the total cost of your garbage bill. So those increases, while they're individually substantial, don't have a significant amount or effect on individual customer bills because of that other 80%, which also has cost drivers associated with it. It is challenging to estimate the impact on customers because every jurisdiction has a slightly different rate setting process. You know, they may impose franchise fees or other charges that help increase that. But that is our estimate, kind of our best estimate region-wide for the impact of an individual residential customer.
Okay. Thank you. That 80% and 20% helps put that into context for me. Thank you, Chair Smith.
Any other comments? Dan Johnson.
Be so bold, thank you. I guess just first and foremost, as in the past, whenever we have influences or factors that are going forward with our regional partners that are increasing rates that impact our citizens, we will be reporting back to you, the Board of County Commissioners, and having discussions with you. This happened some time ago, this discussion, but again, if there will, going forward, make sure you know that we will be coordinating with you on these discussions. Secondly, I guess I'd ask the chair with the authority and Commissioner Schmidt with the authority for us to meet and just briefly kind of discuss kind of that rate setting process that we have and what are things that we can consider when going forward, because we do need to bring a discussion in front of the board about holding the rates flat, whatever that might look like, and what impacts that might cause, okay? Because there is an increase. So if you'd be so kind to grant that ability to meet and discuss that a little bit further, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Yep, I don't have a problem with that. Gary, comment?
Yeah, so Chair Smith and I will meet with Dan first, and then we'll brief the board after that. Yes.
And then you'll set a time to do that. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, I'm just going back to the one, slide number 14, you know, that minimum charge. Again, I'd just love to know how many people go through there. So you get that at a later time, I'd appreciate it. But that's a 25% increase in the cost to go from $28 to $35. So, you know, I think that's a big number, and I may not be the best example if I go in there with light loads, but I'm just kind of curious. And just also curious, does that minimum charge for that light load apply to the policy that you stated in your charter as far as not charging more than the actual cost? I'm just curious why I understand the transaction piece because you have that embedded for the scale house. So if you left that at $4.75, that still doesn't account for the $7. So I'm just trying to better understand that. Not now, but I'd just like to better understand that piece of it.
Thank you. We can provide some additional information. I would note that the charter restriction on charging not more than the cost of services does apply to the minimum load charge, and we believe, and I should have noted earlier, our rates every year go through an independent third-party review to ensure that we are following all the requirements and using methodologically sound practices. So those rates are based on the actual cost of service.
Okay. Are you doing any large-scale messaging to the retail customers about this rate increase?
We are just starting that process this week, in fact. So letters go out. We have a normal process to let customers know there'll be new signage up at the facility fairly soon. So, yes.
Yeah, I didn't see any there a couple weeks ago, but that'd be good to let people know.
Yep.
How much of an increase will this be passed on to the person who sets their garbage can out at the curb?
That is a discussion for us to have, because obviously
It's an
these are.
important question, don't you think, Dan?
It's a valid question, but it's a discussion around what services we keep. Do we want to cut some services to keep the dollars lower? Who does it impact? And that's where that rate setting session and the board's decision.
Something else I want to know. They say they have not increased their costs over, I forget how many, a year or two because of COVID. But had you kept up with your increased costs and raised your fees accordingly, the increase wouldn't be so much right now. That's a question I would like answered. I'd also like to know if you're operating in a deficit. You say you have reserves. I understand it's good business to have reserves, but I understand if you haven't been raising rates over the last 2 years and now all of a sudden there's a big rate increase, are you operating at a deficit? That's a question for Dan.
Commissioner Smith, or Chair Smith, I can answer that question. Our rate proposal does assume that we will have an operating deficit in the next fiscal year, which is why we are drawing down our rate stabilization reserve by 50%, approximately
Well, are you going to
7.5%.
use those reserves to backfill and then continue to increase rates to the customer?
We're using those rate stabilization reserves to have a smaller rate increase than we might otherwise had to have had if we were not going to operate at a deficit.
Okay, these are questions that we will be exploring. Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, sir. On your where does the money go slide, 45 million public operations staff and major contracts, and 36 million for regional programs, programs, grants, partnerships, and projects. Do those programs, grants, partnerships, projects have some sort of direct relationship to the overall garbage transfer issue?
Yes. I mean, number one, they're required by state law to only be used for solid waste services and activities. And there's a wide variety of services and activities that those revenues go towards, including things like the Household Hazardous Waste Program, the Regional Illegal Dumping Program. A significant portion of those revenues are passed through to local governments like Clackamas County to help fund waste reduction programs and other work in the solid waste system.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, just one more question on that same slide, slide number 6. You got the 45 million, the 36, and the 18. Do I add those together to get $99 million? Is that the budget?
That's approximately our operating budget. If you look at the proposed budget for next fiscal year, it's around 136 million, including budgeted contingencies, as well as capital projects that are not part of the operating budget.
Okay, so I could say that the general government's approximately 18% of that, right?
Well, so the Metro excise tax doesn't actually, it doesn't go into the solid waste fund. It goes to Metro's general fund. So the 45 million and 36 million go into the solid waste fund for solid waste services.
Okay, so that excise tax, that 18 million, can you, to a layman, how would you define the purpose of those dollars? I mean, that's, when it goes towards the government operations, what does that do for the operations or the whole existence of that? I mean, what benefit to the ratepayer is that? Or is that just basically a take, not a take, but a administrative cost typical of all Metro operations? I don't know.
We need to really get going on the next session. Paul, you have great questions, and I believe they all need to be answered. So let's try to submit our questions to staff on that. But there's a question that I want to present to these two gentlemen and your COO, Marissa Madrigal, is if this particular facility is currently operating at a loss, you say you want to build a new facility on Jennifer Road. I assume that would take a huge tax increase, not only a rate increase, to be able to fund that facility on the backs of Clackamas County residents. So that's a question that you can, I don't expect you to answer now, but that's a question that we need to be pursuing and studying for the future. Thank you, gentlemen. This session has ended. Gary,
you.
what's up next?
Yeah, thank you all very much. Next session is File ZDO-280, Fiscal Year 2021, Minor and Time-Sensitive Comprehensive Plan and ZDO Amendments. Our Transportation and Development Staff and Planning and Zoning Division team will present. We have Jennifer Hughes and Glenn Hamburg from the Planning and Zoning Division. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Smith, Commissioners, and Administrator Schmidt. I'm Jennifer Hughes, the County Planning Director, and with me today is Senior Planner Glenn Hamburg. We are here today to talk to you about File ZDO 280. We are seeking board direction on whether to move the fiscal year 2021 minor ZDO and plan amendments forward to a public hearing process at the Planning Commission and the board. Do we have the PowerPoint, Christina?
I am bringing that up just right now.
Perfect, thank you. I guess I'll just talk regardless, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's in your packet. So the long-range planning work program, which we just discussed with you last week, the current long-range planning work program, as well as the one for the next 2 years, includes an annual package of what we term minor amendments. I think I've said this to this board before, that I kind of call these our good government packages. They're ways for us to address relatively minor changes to the code, to address things that are time sensitive, to comply with legal mandates from other levels of government, to clarify existing language and correct errors, and to adopt some optional provisions that do address policy priorities of the board, but that do not require extensive analysis. So we're talking about things where we don't have to go out and do a lot of public outreach, a lot of research, a lot of policy sessions with you and with the Planning Commission, but things that can be done relatively simply. And so with that, I am going to turn this over to Mr. Hamburg, who is going to talk to you about the details of what we're proposing to include in this year's package.
Good afternoon, Chair and the Commission. Glenn Hamburg. There is two attachments with the worksheet. First is Attachment A. Attachment A is a list of 10 what I would call routine cleanup amendments that aren't really substantive, but happy to address those if you have questions. Attachment B is a copy of some draft minutes from the last Planning Commission study session in which some of these issues were discussed. What I will mention here this afternoon is about 6 more substantive issues where we're looking for some input from the board on how or whether even to proceed. The first issue is really about providing developers sufficient time to prepare a land use application without potentially incurring some additional costs or taking more time. it's already the case and is common in jurisdictions for a requirement for a pre-application conference. This is a required meeting ahead of making certain more substantive land use applications. These pre-apps are beneficial both to the applicant and to the county because at these pre-apps, they get some face-to-face guidance from county staff and other interested parties on things to think about as they might be preparing an application, for example, for a subdivision or a zone change. And they get some guidance on actually how to complete the application. So that's helpful to them because they can know what things to look out for, potential red flags, and adopt their application materials accordingly. It's also beneficial for the county because it helps ensure that we get more quality applications submitted to us when those are ready, and that means greater efficiency. So we like pre-apps and they're common. What we found particularly recently though is that the time frame for the validity period, it might be a little bit too short. So right now it's the case that people have to turn in a complete application for their prospective development within 1 year of having a pre-app. So if they want to turn in the application 12 months and a day later, they might have to have a whole new pre-app, even if nothing about their application has changed. Particularly in this last year, we found that maybe 12 months is just an insufficient amount of time, and developers, prospective applicants have had to redo pre-apps. So we're proposing that the pre-application period be extended to 2 years. When we discussed this with the Planning Commission, they cautioned that maybe 2 years is too long and requested we think about just 18 months. And two thoughts on that. 18 months might be a more reasonable time frame. We, in planning and zoning, typically just work on a calendar basis, though, and it might be just more straightforward for administrators of regulations and the public to just understand when the year is up. The Planning Commission also suggested that we might consider giving staff some discretion about when to allow more time for a pre-app. Personally, staff don't want the discretion often. We like clear and objective rules, and I think developers sometimes prefer to know what the rules of the game are at the head of their process. But that's the issue out there. The issue would open up the opportunity for extending pre-application conference validity periods to 2 years, or we might propose just extending it to 18 months, or we might make no change at all. If you like, I can just move on to the next issue, and we could answer questions at the end if that's most efficient. So next slide, please.
I suggest you do it one at a time because there's a lot here and you might lose track otherwise.
Absolutely. So knowing that there are 6 substantive issues and we have however much time you'd like to give us, I'm happy to answer questions about this pre-application issue first.
Is there any questions on the pre-application? I just think it's a great thing to do, personally. I really like that. You can have an extension for 1 year. Commissioners, we're really going to be running late. I understand your questions, but Mark, go ahead, get in, and let's make our questions very poignant.
I was just going to say option A, 24 months. I like it because it's got an element of economy to the developer. Okay? Option A.
Thank you. Without any additional questions, I'll jump to the next issue. The next issue is about expressed allowances in our development code for certain materials to be used on the exterior of buildings, and not just any buildings. We're only talking about industrial, commercial, institutional, or multifamily dwellings here. It's right now the case in the development code, the zoning and development ordinance, that exterior building materials can only be certain types of specific materials, things like brick or wood or stone. Now, the code does allow for the potential for metal as an exterior building material on these types of developments, but it's not entirely clear. It says, for example, that you can use metal if it's quote unquote a high image. Well, to be totally honest, nobody knows exactly what that means. And that's a problem for developers. They want to know what it is are the materials that they're allowed to use. And so even if we want to continue to require that metal be allowed only if it's quote-unquote high image, which we've inferred over years to mean something that looks good, people still don't know whether something that they propose with metal will ultimately be accepted. There's other pathways in the code that could potentially allow for metal as an exterior building material in these types of developments, but it's not always clear. So what we're looking to do, to potentially propose is an expressed allowance for metal as an exterior building material in these types of developments. Again, we're not talking detached single-family dwellings, we're not talking pole barns out in rural areas, just these other types of development. Now, we've discussed this with the Planning Commission, and next slide, please. And we talked about what might be the pros and cons of allowing different types of metal, different metal treatments, and where potentially we could allow it in the code. One option would be to just allow any type of metal in any potential treatment in any amount anywhere in the county. And that's option A on the worksheet. Another approach might be to just allow the use of metal siding expressly only in rural areas. Or there might be consideration on just allowing certain types of metal or limits on metal. Some jurisdictions, for example, have prohibitions on the visibility of exterior fasteners, things like screws on the outside. Some jurisdictions have limitations on the use of corrugated metal, or limitations on metal that is a component of shipping containers that are converted into other buildings. What staff are proposing is to have an allowance for metal as an exterior building material in all areas of the county, but in urban areas potentially have certain limitations on what that metal exterior could include. And perhaps we go
urban areas?
in urban areas.
Why?
Is one thought that we already have design requirements in certain areas of the county, and people and businesses near to metal buildings might have specific thoughts about what they should look like. But that's not the recommendation of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has recommended that we just allow metal as an exterior building material in all areas of the county without any of these sort of
I would agree with the
exceptions.
Planning Commission. I don't know about the rest of, the cost of building is horrendous. We're trying to attract businesses to Clackamas County, but yet we make it really expensive for them to build in the more urban areas. I like the recommendation of the Planning Commission. Commissioner Scholl?
Yes. Option A, I like. The building products industry is developing many new metal sidings that look really nice. They're applicable for residential, commercial projects. And the fire safety issue of metal siding, I really like. I support option A.
Commissioner Savas?
Well, the part I'm struggling with and just help me understand this, but as I read option A, it says use of any metal with or without any corrosion treatment. So I'm kind of concerned about the anti-corrosion element, frankly. I don't mind whether it's metal or aluminum or anything else, but if it's not, doesn't have any corrosive elements to it, we have enough stuff being dumped on us from China to have any more low-quality metals with low-quality finishes that are, falling apart. So that's the part I have a challenge with, colleagues.
Yes, some designs for commercial and residential use siding that is corroded. You've seen the rust on some buildings. It's just a design feature. It's not bad. It rusts to a point and stops.
Well, I know there's some designs that use metal that's pre-rusted and it's heavier gauge and there's no sacrifice or compromise and it's in its structural integrity.
Right.
And so I'm talking about siding, which if it falls away, it falls away. That's not really structurally or insulation-wise smart, especially in rural areas where you have rodents and invasion of other things and things like that. So I just have a concern about that one.
Do we need to vote on this separately, Gary?
Dan, what do you need?
We just need direction from the board, I believe, on which.
Okay, I'm going to entertain a motion that we allow metal, aluminum, or any other type of like product on buildings in rural and urban zones where commercial activity may happen. Do I hear a second?
I second that.
Motion has been made and been seconded. Do we have any further discussion?
Yeah, just a friendly amendment, would you add metals with anti-corrosion features?
With corrosion features?
With anti-corrosive elements or features?
You know, I'm concerned about that because I really don't know what that means. You know, we built a sizable building 30 years ago on my property of aluminum painted siding, and it doesn't have, 1 ounce of rust on it. And you know what the winters or springs and falls are like in Oregon. I just don't know what that means, Paul.
Well, that's probably because it's got some anti-corrosion element to it that if it didn't rust.
Aren't most of the products sold these days that way?
Well,
I think
it's explicitly saying all metals with or without, so that'd open up a market for corrosive metals or no treatments to be opened up. That's the part I don't like.
Can we have a staff comment on that?
Yeah, one suggestion might be that we could proceed with drafting amendments that have some provision about anti-corrosive treatments unless the corrosion was an intended element of the design. And then when these amendments are brought forth at public hearings later on this summer, that could potentially be amended. But we could explore maybe some language that could get there, but it's not necessarily the language that has to be adopted.
See, this is just for buildings, correct? This is not for landscaping.
Correct.
Because it is in style now, using some of the metal siding that has rusted for a particular look. And that goes to the design element. So would you be eliminating that if we added an anti-corrosion element to this?
I think based on what Glenn said, we would accommodate what you're talking about. There are some really cool looking buildings that do exactly what you're talking about. In fact, Glenn had some pictures that he found in his research. But what we're trying to prevent is that sort of unintentional, right? The building rusts, or the building maybe gets a little bit of damage to it and then it rusts there. So we can write the draft that way, and then if you choose ultimately not to keep the anti-corrosive provision, you can repeat, we can propose it and you can change it as it comes through hearing.
So can you take care of that language and accommodate Commissioner Savis's concerns
Yes,
with the current motion?
yes.
Paul, would you be accepting of that?
I think staff heard us, and they're right. There are some things that are designed to be rusted, but they're literally designed to withstand that and be thick enough and heavy enough to have that architectural look and have that feature and not be, lose their integrity, their structural integrity. So I realize that. So yes, staff's got it.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, I'm not totally up on like what's corrosive, what's not corrosive, and what kind of metal does what, and what's this and what's that. But I do know that I don't want us to allow just metal without restriction in, more urbanized neighborhoods, areas. I'm okay out in rural areas for sure, if there needs to be a certain type of structure that should be used with metal. That I can see how that could be very, very functional, but really would want some sideboards on it, if that makes sense. And if that's all in alignment with what this motion is, then I'm good to go.
Yep.
Does that sound right, Paul?
Yeah, that sounds right. I'll just give you an example. If you're on the coast, you're not allowed to use sinkers, which are just metal nails. You can't use them. You have to use galvanized nails, period. You're not even allowed to even be sold out there.
Well, that makes sense on the coast.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, in most of these sidings for the metal buildings, there's special galvanized, even in the valley, that you would use on that. Hearing no more discussion, Christina, please call the poll on the motion.
Yes. Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Savis?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
Commissioner Schultz?
Aye.
And Chair Smith?
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next slide, please. The next issue is about making sure that the county's zoning and development ordinance allows drive-through businesses to have additional signage specifically for their drive-throughs. It turns out it's the case in 2021 that the zoning and development ordinance does not allow drive-through businesses any more freestanding or on-building signs than any other commercial business, despite them having an operations element that includes a sign in their drive-through lane. So we're just looking to amend the zoning code to specifically say that drive-through businesses can have these additional signs to remove the ambiguity in the zoning code. The Planning Commission is in support of this as well. They recommended that we consider some limitations on what those additional signs are to make sure that they're really about signage for drive-throughs. But it's important to know that we cannot regulate the content of signs. So we couldn't say that you get additional signage for a menu. We could say something, though, along the lines of, you can have additional signage oriented to the drive-through lane, and maybe there's a height limit, like 8 feet, something that's common for a drive-through sign. Right now, we're not looking to limit, though, the number of drive-through signs that any particular business could have. There's just way too many variables of what a business might want to do. We're just looking to make sure that drive-through businesses are allowed to have drive-through signs by way of the code.
Any comments on the signage?
Move that be approved.
I want to be clear, in the packet materials before you, there is a small typo. It says options, I think, F and G.
Thank you.
That's actually should be A and B. So the Planning Commission and staff recommended approval of A,
Correct, which is
which is
listed as
allowing,
F in the
allowing
worksheet.
signage.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay. Christina, call the poll.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
And Chair Smith?
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Up next.
Thank you. Next slide, please. The next issue is about the county having more restrictions than state law requires on property line adjustments in natural resource zones. Natural resource zones are exclusive farm use land, timberland, or ag forest land, just those 3 zones. It's right now the case that the county has restrictions on how much property could be transferred simply by moving an existing lot line from one property to another. And the county has a restriction on the number of times that could effectively be done in certain cases. These are not state rules, they're the county's own rules. I can't speak to why these rules might have been put on the books in years past. We think it might have been an effort to protect farmland in forest land by limiting how much land could be transferred from one property to another. However, we've seen staff on a weekly, monthly basis that sometimes that has the opposite effect. And so in this example I have on the slide, imagine that there are 2 farmland zone parcels, one that's 35 acres and the other that's 40. And as was the case with a customer I was helping just weeks ago, a property owner inherited a property from a deceased relative. They had no intention of farming the property. They couldn't use the farmland that was out there, and they wanted to transfer that farmland to a neighbor who was interested in it. The next slide, please. That would have meant that they would be reducing the size of their property by more than what the county would currently allow in terms of size. And the county code says once you reduce the size of your property in a natural resource zone through a property line adjustment once, you can never do it again. Staff are proposing to repeal these laws and align the zoning code with what state law limits the county in doing in terms of property line adjustments. We are proposing to repeal this essentially 5% limit on a reduction through property line adjustments and repeal the one-time size reduction limit that's in the code right now. The Planning Commission is supportive of this as well. And so together the Planning Commission and staff are recommending option A in the worksheet.
So in state law, how many times can you do a property line adjustment?
To my knowledge, there's no limit.
And so what is the net remainder of the property in state law?
Well, under state law, if a property is already undersized, meaning that it's already smaller than what the minimum lot size would allow today, then you could potentially reduce the size of the property down to as small as you like, provided that it can still accommodate practically a house, a septic system, et cetera. But we don't allow a property to be reduced in size by more than 5% of its current size. Do I have that right?
Generally, there's an exception which no one really understands.
But please speak up, Jennifer.
Sure, there's an exception to this 5% standard that Glenn's talking about, but frankly, the exception itself is confusing. So these regulations have been in our code since 1995. I think it was a policy choice by the Planning Commission and the board at the time. And state law, does have some limits. If you're above the minimum lot size, if you have 85 acres of farmland, you can't take it below the 80-acre minimum. But if you're already under, they'll let you trade back and forth with your neighbor. And really, the only limit is that you cannot use a property line adjustment in order to qualify for a dwelling, if the lot doesn't already qualify. And there's even some exceptions to that, but.
Oh, interesting, yes. Commissioners,
But in short, I believe repealing these specific provisions would align our work with the state's
Correct.
requirements, correct? Okay.
Yes.
I understand. Commissioner Savas?
So I understand the intent of rural properties, residential properties, is to have, your drain field and to have another place on the property for a backup drain field. So you wouldn't be allowed to limit it to the alternate, to the backup site, right? You wouldn't be able to shrink it smaller than the one septic site being used.
It ends up that we kind of work hand in hand with our septic and on-site wastewater team on things like that. So they review property line adjustments for us so we can communicate with the applicant about, well, here's where, because sometimes people don't even know, right, exactly where their drain field is and where the replacement area is. So yes, we're able to work that out. If there is no house, though, then it's not an issue. And so hopefully people are thinking ahead in case they someday qualify, but.
And there may be other options there. For example, an easement could be placed on the adjoining property if they choose to adjust that replacement area away. But there are workarounds and discussions to be had, so.
Yeah, because if there's no place to put any kind of septic drain field or anything else, there's nothing you can really do with it other than farm it, right?
Okay, Gary, do we need to take a motion on each one, or did we just, ask for an objection on this?
I move for option A.
I agree.
I do recommend a motion on each one, just so you're clear. and the
Okay,
staff is-
I'll entertain a motion
I move we approve option A
on lot line adjustment. Mark? On lot line adjustment.
on lot line adjustment.
Thank you. Here a second?
Yep.
Okay, motion has been made by Commissioner Scholl and seconded by Commissioner Savas. Any more discussion? Hearing none. Christina, please call the poll.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
And Chair Smith?
Aye, motion passes 5-0. What's up next?
Thank you. Next slide, please. The next issue is about providing an approval pathway for what I'm going to call standalone government offices in more urban residential zones, as we already do in most zones of the county. So it's already the case that in urban residential zones, there's an approval pathway in the zoning code for many types of government uses, things like a school, a library, a fire station. And if you have any one of those government uses, you can also have an accessory office to it, right? So if you get approval for a school, well, the principal can have an office in that school. If you get approval for a fire station, that fire station can have its own office. There isn't, though, by virtue of, I'll say, an accident some years ago, any longer an approval pathway in most urban residential zones for a standalone government office. So maybe a school district administration building, or maybe there's a public parks agency that just wants to have an administration building without having a park on the same property. There's a pathway already in the zoning code to allow for that in most all zones of the county, industrial zones, commercial zones, urban and rural. It's just the case that in some urban residential zones that's not allowed, and that doesn't appear to be any active policy choice of the county, but maybe just the result of moving some code sections back and forth years ago, that this was left out. So staff has discussed this with the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission recommends allowing these standalone government offices as a conditional use in urban residential zones. A conditional use permit requires there to be a public hearing. So it's not the type of use that somebody would come in, turn in some paperwork, and we would stamp approved. Rather, it would get publicly noticed to neighbors. There would be a public hearing, and the county hearings officer would issue a decision on that application after evaluating the specifics of the property, the specific neighborhood, the potential impacts, and the consistency of the proposal with the county's comprehensive plan provisions. So they're recommending that we allow government offices as a conditional use in urban residential zones like we do in rural residential zones, up on the mountain, et cetera. And that would be option A on the worksheet.
And just to maybe add a couple of comments, the conditional use pathway is what existed previously before this inadvertent drafting error that resulted from, well, it's not even important, but the bottom line is that was the pathway that existed. And then just to be transparent, we have had a couple of situations in the last few years where there has been a government entity that has been interested in locating an office. One was related to a fire district wanting to put their district offices on a residential site where they had a fire station, but this would have been the office for the whole district, and the code doesn't currently have a pathway for that. The other one is that it may well be an issue for the Concord school site, for the Parks District, having an interest in having their district offices there. So there are some specific situations where this process, this permitting process may end up being used.
Any comments for staff on this? I'll entertain a motion.
I move we allow government offices in urban residential zones as a conditional use.
As a conditional use?
Yes,
As
that's
option
correct.
A.
That's option A.
Thank you very much. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion was made by Commissioner Scholl, seconded by Commissioner Fisher. Any further comment? Christina, please call the poll.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
And Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. What's up next?
Thank you. This is the last substantive issue. The issue is whether to expand an existing program that offers a choice to small-scale developers inside of the Portland metro urban growth boundary. So a little bit of background here. When you have certain types of development in an urban area, it's sometimes the case that you have to construct frontage improvements. So if you have a vacant lot, you want to put a house on it, and there's no sidewalk out there, it's usually the case that you have to install the sidewalk. Well, the county has an existing program that allows the smaller scale developers the choice of whether to construct that frontage improvement or instead just pay a fee to the county based on an engineer's cost of what that frontage improvement would be, that then gets put into a pot and allocated to sidewalk improvements elsewhere where they might be a greater priority. So I mentioned this is only for small scale developers, this fee in lieu of option, FILO. It's only an option for people putting a house on a vacant lot, a single house, or partitions resulting in no more than 3 lots. FILO, though, is not an option for larger scale development, like a large subdivision or an institutional use. In those cases, the developers don't have a choice. They must build the required sidewalks. But this existing program where smaller scale developers can instead pay a fee is a choice that they have. They can construct the sidewalk if they really want to, but in certain cases, the sidewalk that they would be otherwise required to install may not connect to anything, and maybe neighbors have no intention of ever doing any development in the year ahead, so developers are being required to build a sidewalk that may not be used. And instead, the money that's collected for FILO goes into a pot, and then the money is spent on potentially more advantageous projects still also in the Portland Metro UGB. In the history of this program, there's been essentially 4 projects funded from FILO. This is not a huge moneymaker for the county, but in the history of the FILO program, FILO funds have been used to provide sidewalks to schools or to fill in sidewalk gaps between libraries and residential areas. But there's a limitation right now in the code that says collected FILO funds can only be used on certain types of road classifications and not others in the Portland Metro urban growth boundary. So staff of the county's Transportation Engineering Division have recommended that we make some changes to it. They've recommended essentially two changes. One, that we allow the collected FILO funds to be spent on pedestrian improvements along streets in the Portland Metro UGB, regardless of their classification. This would allow potentially collected FILO funds to be spent on improvements along River Road, for example, in the Oak Grove area, along Thiessen, or other arterials in the Portland Metro UGB. Right now, we can't spend the money on those projects, even if the community agrees it'd be really great to have a sidewalk out here. The other change that they're proposing is that we expand the opportunities, the conditions under which a property owner could choose to pay FILO. It's the case right now that you can't just say, I want to pay FILO instead of constructing my sidewalk just because you want to. You have to show that there are certain conditions on the property. For example, there might be topographic constraints. There might be a giant cliff in front of your property. Therefore, the code says you can pay FILO instead. The Transportation Engineering Division has recommended that we expand the list of qualifying opportunities for which somebody can choose to pay FILO to include something like the sidewalk that you would otherwise have to construct would not connect to any sidewalk. Then you can choose to pay FILO if you want to. Or that the sidewalk you want to construct would have storm drainage constraints. Maybe constructing the sidewalk would cause drainage issues. Staff want to allow somebody to choose to pay FILO instead. Again, though, it's a choice. If somebody really wants to construct their sidewalk, they could. So we've discussed this with the Planning Commission really on several occasions in different meetings. One of their concerns is just making sure that the FILO funds that are collected are spent equitably. And one way to look at that might be making sure that we spend FILO funds generally in the areas where the FILO funds are collected. And I didn't bring a map with me now, but we've had staff look into this, and it's generally the case that the FILO projects that have been funded are more or less in the same areas where we're collecting the monies. So we get a lot of FILO revenues, well, in the comparison of things, in the Oak Grove neighborhood, and then we have used those collected funds to make improvements in the Oak Grove neighborhood, including ADA curb ramps along Oak Grove Boulevard. Really, I'll just leave it at that with that issue and see if you have any questions. But staff are recommending option A in the worksheet.
Can I build on that for 1 second?
Yeah.
I want to emphasize a couple things. This program is near and dear to my heart because I was involved in developing it, because it doesn't make sense. I mean, you got small pieces of property out front. They're required to do improvements. Let's provide a choice. And all those folks that know development, these issues domino. You know, I make a small section of sidewalk improvements. I got to do storm drainage now. I don't know how long it's ever going to be till that little pedestrian sidewalk is going to connect to some other pedestrian sidewalk. If I have a capital project going there, we're probably ripping out that sidewalk. So all those things kind of went into the development of this program. But the single biggest thing I want to highlight is the fact that it's a choice. They can build it, or if we choose that they are offered that choice, they have the ability to not do that. So that's all I got.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, well, I've got a lot to say about this one.
Okay,
and
you go for it.
Maybe Dan and I are not gonna be friends after this, but
Excellent.
I don't mean it that harshly. But so this is a huge challenge. This has been 20-something years of, I would say, conflict and controversy in at least the communities I've been in. I know that there's other communities, older communities in Lake Oswego and other cities where they don't have sidewalks. And lo and behold, one of the communities came out, the CPOs came out with grave concerns about HB 2001 and not having the infrastructure, sidewalks, drainage, and all those things. So if we're going to be waiving sidewalks for ADUs and other developments where they would otherwise be needed or required, then really what we're forcing kids to do if there's no sidewalk and pedestrians is to walk out in the street around the cars that are parked for all those new residents as infill grows and grows and grows. That's, you know, if it wasn't for HB 2001, I wouldn't feel this passionate about it. But we're allowing infill at a greater level than the streets were ever designed to handle, and to waive the sidewalk, which I feel is a safety issue, okay, number one. and the drainage, which is another issue as well. But you know, we've heard loud and clear, and I think there's a lot of people that years back voted for Philo and said, yeah, let them waive it, and then realized that it was so incentivized. I don't know if it's changed. I don't know exactly what the formula is, but the contractor was, or the developer was not even paying very much for the fee in lieu of, right? So it was incentivized to waive it. So it was incentivized not to build it.
But it's not a requirement.
So this one I struggle with, especially, I haven't even mentioned the essential pedestrian network. I had to fight for a sidewalk for kids at a crosswalk, the one on Kellogg, you know this.
Oh, I do. It's near and dear to my heart.
Staff planning recommendation, waive it, Philo, everything else. And I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that. I was so hot about that one. And it should have been built. No safe on the essential pedestrian network, right near a school, close by a school pathway, a daycare, and we're waiving the sidewalk requirement on a narrow road that doesn't even meet roadway width standards. That was, I'm passionate about this, if you can't tell. So help me out. What am I misunderstanding?
Correct me if I'm wrong.
I will.
As it relates to HB 2001, I don't believe there would be any direct requirement for ADUs to facilitate the need for frontage improvements. You made that reference. Also, even if there were a requirement through our land use process, you have to show the exaction of those improvements are roughly proportional to the impact of that business or the impact of that particular use. And so the challenge would be that, well, I guess one, it's not required, and so we wouldn't be using them in that set of circumstances. Now, you're talking about the one-off, the development aspects of it and where it applies, and maybe we have a broader discussion when we bring it back for the commission about looking at areas of applicability, like certain roads that wouldn't get waived or something like that. I mean, the problem that we've got with the essential pedestrian network, to be honest, it's like every road in unincorporated Clackamas County. And if you talk about a network, I mean, that's not every single classification of road. And we've been going through this process. I'm not sure if we've done that yet. Have we looked at that? Have we talked about looking at that?
At the essential pedestrian
Yeah.
network? Not as part of this.
No, not as part of this. But we had discussions around the fact that it's so inclusive of every single road, every classification. I mean, and there's pros and cons to that. I mean, the cons are, I guess the pros are the fact you're looking to provide pedestrian connectivity throughout the neighborhoods and throughout the communities, which is a pro. The cons are the fact that, you know, there should probably be some discussion around how that essential pedestrian network really relates to higher volume roadways, higher classification roadways, be it arterials or collectors or things like that, or minor and major arterials and not collectors. But it applies everywhere. And I can't say we get it right all the time. I mean, you just brought up an example of where, you know, you're passionate about that particular issue. But, you know, what it does, though, is it allows, and I'll flip the example on you. Take a drive up Idleman Road. You go up Idleman Road.
Just out there on Sunday.
So you go up from Schumacher, and there's that little project on the right-hand side that has a sidewalk that is, you know, 50 feet wide. When we do a capital project on Idleman, if we ever do one, we're never going to be able to retain that. And so the discussion is there really value in that? Now, that doesn't mean they don't get additional, like, safe area. You know, they may not have a sidewalk there. They may have a shoulder or something to that extent that provides refuge in an area where they can go. But is that sidewalk, will it be able to be retained with the capital project? Probably not, because of the design of the entire road. And is there a value to actually do that improvement? And that's just a deep philosophical discussion around what that looks like, so.
I just, after years and years and years of all these land use approvals and developments approvals, I think that there's some regrets for allowing the FILO, from the community council for allowing or recommending or rubber stamping the fee in lieu of. And so are we collecting a comparable fee for it, or it's still incentivized? Still an
It's engineer's
financial
estimate, isn't it?
incentive.
Yeah.
Yes, it was changed. It used to be a linear, so many dollars per linear foot, and it was changed, so now it's based on an engineer's cost estimate. So we should be recouping closer to what it really costs, yes.
So you're close to 100% of the cost.
Right.
It's just a matter of practicality. I don't know, I just need some better definition of this. You know, road width, I mean, there ought to be more detail with this one. This one I struggle with, I really do. I'm only one person here, I'm only one vote.
Yeah.
But after that one incident where it was safety, it was kids, a lot of traffic on Kellogg, more than any other road nearby other than Risley. And Risley was a crosswalk. By the way, this crosswalk terminated into a culvert. A culvert. This is kids leaving school. And that's where the crosswalk ended, into a culvert.
Paul, how long ago was this?
It was 2007.
Okay. Hopefully, we've learned something in 13 years, but let's think about what you're saying, and I have a couple other commissioners in the queue. Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, if expansion of opportunities for developers to choose to pay the FILO encourages small builders to build out a project, and if it has a net effect of bringing down the cost of that house, I support option A.
I would tell you that I would assume that would be the case, because what they are saving on are basically the construction timelines and associated aspects of that construction of that improvement, but they are paying an engineer's estimate for that cost. So it doesn't necessarily reduce the physical cost of the improvement itself, but it may prove to be beneficial in regards to their construction schedule and timing and the ability to get those things to the market quicker, which would be a financial gain for them.
To me, well, it ought to be an exception, or it ought to be something exceptional to waive it.
I think this is striking up a bigger discussion around the essential pedestrian network, to be frank. I mean, I think that's kind of where we need to tackle it. It's like, where are those roads that really are that network of roads that need to be providing sidewalks in our community? But
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking safety,
Yeah.
kids and pedestrians.
Yeah.
That's what's on my mind.
Okay, we have a decision to make on this particular option. Do I hear a motion? Oh, excuse me, there's a red light on.
Commissioner Fisher.
Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, okay, so, Dan, I'm sorry, now I'm confused. I'm trying to figure this out. There's a lot of learning I'm doing today between corrosive materials and nails that Paul's talking about, and I'm Googling stuff for information. But I, in reviewing this, was under the assumption that Commissioner Scholl was saying that, okay, this could be good because we need to do everything we can to incentivize development, especially small-scale residential, and it's so expensive when you hear from anybody that builds a house, well, you have to pay all these fees, and you have to pay this, and you have to pay that, and before you even get to put one bit of foundation in the ground, it is just so expensive to build anything. So my assumption is that paying the fee in lieu of, what's the O stand for?
Of.
Yeah, just of.
The fee in lieu of. So instead of having to do the improvements, the frontage improvements themselves, that would make it less expensive. But if you're saying that it might not, and then I hear Commissioner Savas, which it's like, yeah, you want to make sure that when you're doing development that you have safety. So I'm confused. I don't know. This is confusing. I don't want to get this wrong. Was there a community, besides our planning commission, was there community engagement on this with different groups or?
No, we've not gone that far yet. Right now, we're sort of just at the stage, should we even propose these amendments and have public hearings? So we've not gone that far to the public yet. FILO is not an opportunity for developers to get out of having to contribute to sidewalk and pedestrian improvements in the county. They will have to contribute with the new development. It's an option, though, for certain people if they meet certain conditions like topographical challenges, storm drainage constraints as proposed here, to instead of making that investment into frontage improvements that may be problematic, detrimental, or not provide any benefit, to instead put that money into a pot that does get spent on something that might have wider community benefit, like connected sidewalks to a school or ADA improvements.
Yeah, and I like all that. It's like taking from here and putting it there where it's more prioritized and needed, but I don't like what Commissioner Savas is talking about, where certain areas might not be improved and it could be detrimental for especially pedestrians and that whole issue of how do people walk and move around in our communities, so.
I'm sure I could bring a
Man,
few.
I don't know, Paul. I was all set to move forward on this, and you've just blown up my whole thinking. Thank you.
I can manage to bring a few people to a hearing if this ever comes there, so just so you know, there's a few people that would show up on this
I mean,
one.
is
Because
there
we have a
any in
community
between?
clamoring for
Okay, so
safety and
commissioners,
sidewalks.
commissioners, we have two options available to us, or we can amend them. So I suggest we either have a motion for one of the two options, or make a motion for one of the two options with an amendment.
Yeah. Chair Smith, I don't know what the amendment would be. Commissioner
Well, there-
Savas, do
we
you have an
them two. We
idea?
have Amendment A, we have Amendment.
Oh, I
or,
know, but I mean to
option A.
amend one of those
Commissioner
options.
Scholl, would you care to take a stab at it?
Yes, I move we approve option A to allow builders of small-scale residential development in the Portland Metro UGB to choose to pay the FILO.
Okay, do I hear a second? I'll second it. Paul, would you like to make an amendment to this to satisfy your concerns?
Well, right now, absent some reworking of the language, and I'm not here to wordsmith it, I'm inclined to go for B or to defer to another time.
Well, we have one option on the table. We either
Yep, I
vote
I
that
see
up or
that.
down.
Yep.
And then we can consider something else. I see staff having a little sidebar discussion there. Maybe they can enlighten us, you think?
Thank you.
That's you, Dan.
That's you guys.
What are you
I
talking
was trying to find a solution, my apologies.
I know you're trying to find a solution for this. Yeah, would you care
Can
to
I have 2
comment?
seconds? Just to-
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
We're just going to pause for a moment.
Let's pause. Hey, Paul.
Commissioners, I have to leave for an appointment. I have to be there at 4 o'clock, so Commissioner Savas has agreed to finish chairing the meeting at the time that I need to leave, so.
Different criteria for when you
Paul.
do and don't leave it.
But that
Isn't there something like, unless there are safety concerns?
Yeah,
Okay.
It's complex.
No, I know.
It's a little bit more complex than that.
So we do have the ability, if the board chooses to go forward with the recommendation that Commissioner Scholl has placed, we have certain criteria that are outside of this code that we look to apply or allow this flexibility, okay? And we could have a discussion with Commissioner Savas offline about those criteria and look at those criteria and see if there might be things you might want to add to that to address this concern. What I'm hearing most specifically is around proximity to schools, and that there be some additional criteria or policy, and I can't tell you if it's in there or not right now, to be frank, but there could be the ability to add a requirement that there isn't the opportunity for this if they're within a quarter mile of a school or something like that.
I'll just add 2 comments on that. Commissioner Savas, it's been said that was about 13 years ago when this happened. Hopefully, we're more advanced and don't do that. And secondly, would the criteria be subjective to the person standing behind the counter is the issue that I would have if it's not written. Does that make sense?
No, we will need to have objective criteria because we're talking about residential development, and by law, we have to have objective criteria. So there would have to be something as simple as, within a quarter mile of a school, you can't pay FILO, you have to build the sidewalk.
So let me just ask another question. So if you have a high-traffic street and there's a lot of traffic and there's a need for sidewalks, would it be waived? Would FILO come into effect on a high-traffic road?
Well, yeah.
It depends on the classification of that road and whether there are one of the enumerated conditions that have been satisfied. And right now, those are things like there's topographic constraints, that there is no sidewalk within 200 feet, that the street is not on some capital improvements program already. If you can meet one of those conditions, then you have the opportunity to pay FILO.
Just to clarify, this is not the final time that you'll have to look at this. You're going to be able to look at it again. And we're just asking the question on whether or not you'd like to move forward with it. Doesn't mean you have to adopt it at a future date either.
Well, if we move forward with the motion today, are we going to, the language that comes back, will it be this, or will we kind of massage it a little bit? Can we massage it a little bit to help out Commissioner Savas get there?
Yeah.
Okay. I see a red light.
Commissioner Fisher?
Fisher.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we can move this forward today, but amend it to provide that there is objective criteria to assure safety is not compromised. And does that work? Just to move us forward today, you can do fee low, but if safety's compromised in some way, you guys will figure that out and bring it back.
Yes, but I would say we have to have more specificity around how is safety compromised?
Yeah, and so that's where
More objective standards around that.
Yeah, and we
Yep.
need your advice based on what your magic is.
Okay, I'm prepared to take a vote. Christina, please call the poll. Thank you for that, for Commissioner Fisher. Go ahead.
Yes, Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
No.
Commissioner Schull?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
And Chair Smith?
Aye, motion passes 4-1. Thank you very much, staff.
Thank you
Thank
very
you very
much.
much. If I could ask
Yes.
your indulgence, my apologies for speaking so much. You voted on every one of these measures except for the very first one.
That's right, I
And could you
realized
go back
that.
to that one, please, and then?
Yes, let's move back, and I will entertain a motion as soon as I find number 1, and you were right on that. Okay, that one is the pre-application conference validity period. Options for moving forward, we have 3 of them. Extend the pre-app validity period to 2 years, that's number 1. Extend the pre-app to 18 months. Retain the existing 12-month pre-app. And the recommendation is, I don't see the recommendation.
From staff, the recommendation is A, 24
A.
months.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to accept the 24-month pre-app validity period.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Schull and second by Commissioner Fisher. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Christina, would you please call the poll?
Yes, Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Schull?
Yes. Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
And Chair Smith?
Aye, motion passes 5-0.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's go back to number 6, because I'm not clear what the board decided, so I want to know if you're clear, Dan and Jennifer and Glenn, on what the board decided on number 6.
The
We approved
board-
option A, but there were some things Commissioner Fisher suggested.
The board suggested moving forward with option A. However, they're asking us to look within the policies about how we apply this, more clearer criteria where it won't mitigate or limit impact safety, which means we have to develop standards, objective standards around that. So proximity to schools, things, street volumes, things like that.
As long as you got it, that's good.
Yeah, he got it.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you all very much.
Yep.
Gary, what's up next?
All right, we got 2 more to go, Commissioners. Next is Regional Infiltration and Inflow Partnership Proposal. Water Environment Services will present. Chris Story, Assistant Director, is in the room. Are you presenting, Chris?
I'm quoting Greg Geist on Zoom.
Okay. Greg, are you online? Is he online?
Yeah, he's
Greg,
online.
go ahead.
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, Chair Smith and Commissioners. My name is Craig Geist. I'm the Director of Clackamas Environmental Services. As Gary mentioned, Chris Story, the Assistant Director, is also in the room to answer questions about this item. I'm really excited to present this today, to be quite honest. It's been something that we've been working on and thinking about for at least first, I'll give you and the viewers a little bit of background. Clackamas Water Environment Services serves over 190,000 people in the urbanized area of Clackamas County. We treat over 7 billion gallons of wastewater per year, and we essentially take what goes down your toilets and we make 3 things. We make clean water that we return to the river, we make electricity, and we make a natural fertilizer that's used on agricultural fields. We have in the metro area 2 large wastewater treatment plants, one in Milwaukee and one in Oregon City. And a lot of people in the community may be familiar with those facilities because they are large, visible industrial facilities. But what people don't see is what gets their sewage from their toilet to those facilities. And that is well over 1,000 miles of underground pipes. Of those 1,000 miles, West owns and operates a little over 350 miles. So the rest of those underground sewage pipes are owned and operated by cities such as Milwaukee, Johnson City, Oregon City, Westland, and Gladstone. And to give you an idea, 1,000 miles of underground pipe, that's roughly the distance between Seattle and San Diego. It's an enormous number. Some are old, some are new. Some leak and some don't. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So anytime you have 1,000 miles of underground sewage pipe, you're going to have leaks. And when we think about leaks, we think about two things. We think about inflow, which is things like roof downspouts and street catch basins, that when it rains, it takes that clean rainwater and deposits it directly into our sanitary sewer collection system. The other thing is infiltration. So infiltration is, again, during the wintertime, Oregon is wet, our soils get wet. When we have high water or high groundwater events, any defects in those underground pipes, separated joints, cracked pipes, manholes that are aged and leaking, allow clean groundwater into our sanitary sewer collection system. So between the inflow and the infiltration, during the wintertime, some portions of our system have what we call excessive INI. So we know that a certain amount of leakage is going to be acceptable and normal, given the age and complexity of our system. But we've also identified areas where it's clearly excessive. And so what happens is during those winter storm events, we don't have a choice of whether we treat that water and send it out and clean it and send it out to the river. It all has to go through our treatment plants. We use people, we use machines, we use chemicals, we use energy, and it costs money to treat that essentially clean rain and groundwater. So what we found, we worked with our partner cities and combined information and did a series of evaluations, analysis, and modeling, and found 19 subbasins, so essentially pipe sheds within our service area, within that 1,000 miles of pipe, that have excessive INI. And what we also found is that portions of those 19 subbasins can be found in every jurisdiction with the exception of Johnson City. And so what we realize is, we have a regional problem that needs a regional solution. And so what we do is we looked at, well, we either have to fix our leaky pipes or we need to treat that wastewater and expand our treatment facilities to accommodate that, because leaky pipes over time get leakier. And so we did an analysis. We know approximately how much it costs to treat, to build treatment capacity for so many millions of gallons of wastewater. And we have industry norms for how much it costs to remove a significant amount of inflow and infiltration from our system. And what we found is that there's a savings for our ratepayers of about $120 million if we fix the leaky pipes versus building additional treatment capacity. And that's over the next 20 years. So we worked with our partner cities, we worked with our advisory committee, we looked at options and came up with the proposal that I'm presenting to you today. And what I'm calling this, or have been calling it, is the first step in our 1,000-mile journey. So what we're proposing is a cooperative and a collaborative and a cost-sharing approach, a 3-year pilot program where West would fund 33% of the inflow and infiltration reduction projects that are happening in our partner cities, jurisdictions, within the 19 subbasins that we have identified as having excessive inflow and infiltration. So what we would do is establish intergovernmental agreements with those cities that would talk about our common goals and commitments around I&I reduction, what types of projects it would fund, how we would measure success, and reporting and application type requirements. So what I saw was a huge opportunity here. This is a 20-year program and potentially a 20-year relationship between the district and the cities in order to tackle this regional problem. And so going into it in this 3-year pilot in the spirit of cooperation and collaboration, I think is the right tack to take. So if approved by the board today, we would engage with the various city elected officials and come up with a draft intergovernmental agreement that includes the provisions that are included in the staff report, and bring it back to the board for your approval, hopefully in the fall. There's lots more information in the staff report, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And with that, I would respectfully request that you approve option A, which would allow Wes to work with those elected officials and staff at the cities and prepare a draft intergovernmental agreement to take on this new regional.
Thank you, Greg. Commissioner Savas, do you have a comment?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
But I'm happy to make the motion when we get there.
Any
so.
other comments from commissioners? Gary, you have any comments?
Nope.
Paul, I'll entertain your motion.
Well, let me pull it up here. I moved, we approve option A.
Seconded.
The motion has been made by Commissioner Savas and seconded by Commissioner Scholl. Any further discussions, and shall we wait for Commissioner Fisher to return?
Yeah,
Commissioner Fisher is actually online.
I'm here.
Yeah, I do have just a clarifying question, and that is that if there's not much participation with this, will we anticipate this coming back or postponed?
So I can answer that. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Chris Story, Assistant Director of Water Environment Services.
Chris, can you speak into your microphone? It's very difficult to hear.
Is that better?
Yes.
The proposal is to create one intergovernmental agreement that all entities would be a party to. So our approach in trying to make it regional is not to have one-off agreements or potentially different arrangements. Every city will get the same deal, and every city will see that the other cities are getting the same deal. And it's an incentive participation, which is to say that if a city doesn't do the work, they don't receive the incentive. And to the extent you have a potential free rider problem, that's why it's a pilot project, and we will definitely be coming back to engage with you if we are not seeing everyone pick up their share of the load.
Okay.
And I would add that, we have reviewed the capital improvement plans for the cities, the partner cities, and they do include currently in their 5-year plans, inflow and infiltration reduction projects. So I don't anticipate recalcitrance or unwillingness to do this work because it's already being planned for. And
Well, you can just go forth and do what you can do, and then you can report back to the board the success you have on other jurisdictions adding into the project. Any other comments from commissioners?
Yeah, just briefly, I just want to make sure that those I think there's one city that's got a pretty tight system, and they ought to be somewhat rewarded and not penalized, so to speak. So I don't know how you do that, but I think those who done a good work shouldn't have to be picking up the tab.
Is there a way to do that?
You're referring to Johnson City?
I am.
The struggle we would have with that approach is each city would argue that they're better off relatively than many other cities. Well, I would say Johnson City is probably going to rank the best. Relative number of customers is fairly small. Area that they cover, fairly small. Each other 5 cities that are participating would argue that they're better than the other cities, and then you would get into this ranking evaluation. I should get a bigger subsidy, they should get less, my ratepayer should go. I'm not sure that would accomplish the incentive that we were hoping to accomplish. It's certainly open for dialogue with the elected officials as we go through this process.
Chris, isn't this quantifiable? So you're telling me if you cannot allow a city who is performing in all admissions excellent, has no I&I problem, and they can't be rewarded for that, then I think your data is suspect, if you can't quantify that.
We can quantify the volume that they contribute. They have.
Well, then there's a problem.
Certainly, we can engage that discussion, and Johnson City can raise the issue. We don't have any firm deadlines. I would suggest if you offer it for one, you offer it for all. And that
Commissioner Savas?
engender.
Yeah, I think what's important here is that, if there's, I'm really talking about the financial aspect of this, and we got to remember a city like Johnson City has very low-income folks there, and they are the least who can afford it.
The potential funding for this is coming out of the savings that every ratepayer would experience on the wholesale rate. So we're not divvying up relative savings under this proposal, but that is certainly something we could look at as part of the larger discussions.
Yeah, we do, the Chair, just so we know, we do have flow meters that measure the amount of flow. We know that when it rains, we know where it's coming from, so there is a means of gauging it.
Yes. And that was an option that was deliberated on by the West Advisory Committee, is looking at proportionate costs or relative expenses, and ultimately they thought that that would create more complexity than value and may disincentivize people from participating in the program. But the recommendation could certainly be modified. You are the governing body.
There's a motion on the table. Any further comments? Hearing none. Christina, please call the poll.
Point of order, Chair, I don't have a second.
Seconded.
Yeah, sure, he did. You bitch.
All right, so Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
And Chair Smith.
Aye, Matt. Motion passes 5-0. Gary, what's up next?
All right, thank you, Greg and Chris. Your final session today, Commissioners, are the county audit presentation for fiscal year 2020. We have Krista Wolf, Deputy Finance Director, and the team from Moss Adams to present. Go ahead, Krista.
Is Moss Adams zooming in?
They'll be online, yes.
Thank you, Gary. So we're here today to present to the Board of County Commissioners the results of the FY20 audit. And I'd like to introduce Ashley Austin, who will be joining us remotely. She is the partner from Moss Adams that worked on this engagement. And I'd like to introduce Kevin Moeller-Liley, who is the senior manager on this engagement. And they will share a presentation with the board to go over the results of the FY20 audits.
They are not currently online.
Let's wait for them to join
We are
us.
10 minutes early, so Chair, we still have not done Commissioner communications, if you'd like to go back to that.
Yeah, let's pause on this for just, if you would indulge us, and we'll wait for the Moss Adams folks to come up. Commissioner communication, who would like to go? I believe Commissioner Savas already talked this morning. Commissioner Scholl, you got something you want to say?
I'll be happy to.
Sure.
Yesterday morning, I had a briefing from Shannon Comedic, Director of the Angels in the Outfield. As you probably know, a nonprofit providing hope for children impacted by crime and abuse. They've helped 1,672 kids in Oregon this last year. And she's concerned that when schools go back to being open again, there's going to be a lot of problems coming. That was a very interesting briefing. Angelsintheoutfield.org if you need more information. Also, last Saturday, I got my second shot at the high school in Sandy. I want to thank Health Services for doing a great job, and also thank you to the Ant Farm for helping with traffic. And also, the third thing is, last Wednesday, Commissioner Savas and I were on the Zoom meeting with the I-205 and I-5 Toll Projects Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee with Hannah Williams from the Community Engagement Coordinator from ODOT. This whole tolling and congestion pricing thing is very complex, and I encourage anybody out there who hears this to go to www.oregon.gov/ODOT/tolling and read up on it and make comments online on your feelings about this tolling issue. Thank you.
Commissioner Schrader. Do you have
Yes,
any?
you'll probably hear some background noise a little bit because I've got a little guy that's playing with his bubble toy at the moment. So basically last week, I said that I would update the Board of County Commissioners on the Regional Solutions executive meeting, which really outlined the governor's plan for the rescue funds. You should be receiving in your inbox the notes from that. I think that's a really efficient way for you to get an overview of what we've been talking about. Also, while I am working, via Zoom today, I am also basically working through the process of evaluating grants for the Spirit Mountain Community Fund.
Cool.
I sit on their board, and I'm proud to say that I'm trying to make sure that I'm being fair to every county that has applied, and there have been some very, very good applications from Clackamas County.
Great.
So I'm trying to do my due diligence with that, and it's kind of a fun process, and I'm honored to be included in the particular process. Other than that, I've just been reading and trying to keep up, and watching a toddler run around. So.
Thank you for that, Martha. Commissioner Fisher?
Thank you, Chair Smith. I left the meeting room and needed to run to my office, and there's not enough time to get back. So I will be back shortly if we take a quick break. But I did want to let folks know I participated in the Leaders of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion meeting last week, and they went through a process through their group to develop a land acknowledgement, and it was quite a collaborative process for that group to go through, and I'm hoping, I wanted to get that for today, but I didn't quite get it. I didn't have a copy of it. I want to send that out to my commissioners so that you can see that. Also, there was a really interesting discussion that the group had about the term BIPOC, and it was fascinating to see what the different views are about that term, and kind of what it means, and that, quite frankly, a lot of people don't understand what it means, and it's somewhat, means different things for different people, and it's not a term that everyone particularly likes. So that was educational for me. The other meeting that I participated in was the Public Health Advisory Council. It was the first meeting of the new council. Before this group, this public health was an advisory committee, but it has now been, we as a commission approved new members for this council, and they had their first meeting. It was very much a get to know you. I was really inspired by the group, by the nice, really broad perspectives that are going to be brought, and quite frankly, excited that we as a commission will have the input and advice of this council. It's pretty great stuff. So those are my two reports.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Don't be afraid to share any of the detailed information. I think you might be sitting on a gold mine there. Since the governor has announced going to extreme in Clackamas County, I have received numerous emails, both in my private and in my county, mainly in my private, and then I share them on. But I want to read something to you folks from a citizen of West Lynn. She asks, what exactly are our legal options to separate Clackamas County from underneath Governor Brown? Can we declare our county an autonomous zone? Quote, she's gone too far, enough. Well, I'm getting a lot of requests like this, so I had Stephen Madcore write a very pointed legal opinion based on actions taken by our government, our state government. And he says this, the governor is authorized to declare a state of emergency. ORS 401.165 gives the governor the authority to exercise certain powers and to take certain actions. That particular ORS has been passed by our Oregon legislature, and I believe it has been expanded upon in recent legislative sessions. That declaration of emergency is statewide and will continue to remain in force until it is terminated by the governor or the legislature. The governor's authority to act in this manner was upheld by the Oregon Supreme Court in Elkhorn Baptist Church versus Brown. I think that came down last year. The governor and state law control over county law. There is not much a county can do to defy the state and its enforcement arm. As a general rule, state law will control over any non-existent or contravening county law. So there you have it. If any commissioner wants this opinion, I will gladly forward it to them. Gary, that's it for commissioner communication. what's next? Do we want to stand down still?
I'd like to wait 2 or 3 minutes. That would give Commissioner Fisher time to come back in the room.
Okay, do we have our Moss Adam folks on board?
Online.
Okay, good.
Thank you. I'll run on back. I appreciate it.
So if we can wait just a minute, please.
Yeah, I think that court case was following the July 4th planning that some cities were doing for July 4th holidays that was shut down, and that was the challenge, so, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I was aware of that ruling that upheld the governor's power.
I think, I don't believe the full Supreme Court heard that. I believe the presiding Chief Justice made that decision, didn't he, Paul?
That I don't know.
I think so.
I don't remember.
Which I found really odd. But oh well. Commissioner Fisher.
Chair Smith, don't forget about your appointment now.
I know.
Get there in
Th-
time.
Yeah, I will, thank you.
So we're done for the day after this one, right?
Yes, Paul. Paul, do you want to come sit up here when I leave?
I'm fine, I'll figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's almost here.
She's a slow runner.
Does she run? Because I don't. Just saying.
Ah, there she is.
I know. Well, I asked, do you run?
Here, and I literally put on my mask how long it took. I hear that, Commissioner Fisher.
I asked also, do you run? Because I also made the point, I don't run anymore. Gary, are we ready?
Okay, yes, you turn your sound off.
Yep, no, it's off, yeah.
All right, Krista, go ahead again, please.
All right, one more time. All right, Christina, would you pull up the slides for us so we get that queued up? Thank you. So we're here today to introduce the topic of the audit. We have a presentation for you that is the FY20 audit results. And then today I have Ashley Austin, the partner of Moss Adams, to share this information with you. She is the partner on the audit engagement for Clackamas County. And also Kevin Moeller-Liley, who is the senior manager on the engagement as well. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Ashley and Kevin to walk us through this presentation.
Thank you, Krista. Maybe a quick thumbs up, or can you hear me, Kevin? I can see you. Yep, okay, great. Thank you again for allowing us some space on your agenda this afternoon. We're really pleased to be here to provide the results of the audit for fiscal year 2020. So next slide, please. This is our agenda. It's pretty quick. We're going to go over the key service team members that helped serve Clackamas County over the past year for the fiscal year 2020, and then just 5 questions and answers on the audit process that we, as auditors, think that the commissioners have top of mind and provide answers to those, and we'll then entertain any of your questions. So next slide, please. Again, just a refresher on the engagement team. As Krista mentioned, I am a partner with Moss Adams. I sit in the Portland office location. Obviously, I'm at home today. Kevin Moeller-Liley is the senior manager. He does most of the work. I just get all the credit, unfortunately, but so we're just pleased to be here to give you the results. Next slide. So the first question is, what does an audit of the county entail? And it entails 5 specific things, and they're outlined on this in the following slide. The first is really that independent verification of account balances. So we're digging through your source documentation, we're sending confirmations to external third parties, we're doing analytical review of revenues, expenses. We're also performing substantive tests of details. So really that show me portion of the audit, looking at capital asset invoices, looking at claim payments, looking at subsequent disbursements, all of those things to really get comfort over those transactions and balances at the end of the year, and then all that activity that happened during the year. We also evaluate the effectiveness of internal controls. We're not required to opine on it. We don't opine on internal control, but we do evaluate internal controls, and we're required to obtain an understanding. So we do review those, what we consider key controls in all those significant transaction cycles, and that includes your IT systems as well. We have a separate IT team that looks at all of the various IT controls in place at the county. If we believe that those key controls are operating effectively, then we test some of those for operational effectiveness, and then we would report on any identified control weaknesses that we come across as a result of our procedures. The third thing that an audit typically entails is testing compliance with federal and state laws. So as an Oregon municipal corporation, you are required to comply with those state laws in accordance with Oregon minimum audit standards. We do a slew of tests related to those, including mostly focused on your budgeting process and then also procurement. And then as a result of all the federal funding that you receive and you spend every year, we do spend quite a bit of time looking at the compliance related to those federal grants and whether or not they were in accordance with uniform grant guidance. Next slide, please. The fourth item that that an audit typically entails is a technical review of the financial statements. You know, your annual comprehensive financial report is about 250 pages, and we perform kind of that technical review to make sure that all of the required bells and whistles are included in the disclosures, that the disclosures meet not only GAAP requirements and all those related requirements that GASB has put into place, but also that it will hopefully meet that GFOA award requirements as part of the county always submits for that award on an annual basis. It's a one-year receipt when you receive that award, and the county has received it for a number of years now. So part of our review of those financial statements is to help the county meet the GFOA Certificate of Excellence. We also are looking at all that supplementary information that's presented and make sure that it's presented accurately and in accordance with standards. And then finally, we get to report the results. So we do have quite a bit of individual meetings with the audit committee throughout field work just to touch base and provide status updates throughout the process. And then we also have regular contact with finance staff. We do an exit meeting with the audit committee. We met with them about a month ago. And then we also report to the county commissioners, which is what we're doing today. Next slide, please. So the second question that we think you as commissioners are interested in are the financial statements accurate? Well, you know, it does take us a slew of time. We're in the field. We did conduct the audit remotely this year, but we did have a couple of people that came on site for a few days here and there to look at some of that paper documentation I was mentioning. But all that time that we spend in the field auditing not only the county, but all the component units that some of those flow into the financial statements, it takes me all of 30 seconds to tell you that we issue an unmodified or clean opinion on the financial statements. So that's the highest level of assurance that you can receive. It essentially says that the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with U.S. generally accepted accounting principles. That's what you want to hear. So kudos to management and the commissioners for all the work that they do for the oversight of those financial statements. In terms of additional audit comments, we presented the audit results in more detail to the audit committee, as I mentioned, in March 2021. And then we also have a best practices as part of our audit. We do, as I mentioned, look at those internal controls, evaluate those, and then, you know, we have a lot of different governmental clients, many of them counties, and identify various best practice observations that we can provide to management to help just better the county and better those controls. So we do have that final item to provide to management as part of fiscal year 2020, and that should be provided to them in the next month or so. Next slide, please. So the third question is, did the county comply with all applicable federal and state laws and regulations? And this really gets at the third item that I mentioned on the first slide, which Oregon minimum standards, as well as all of the federal grants that you receive funding for and then spend on an annual basis. So we did issue a separate report on the Oregon minimum standards and on compliance with those standards. Everything was clean except for we did note 2 instances of non-compliance related to excess expenditures over appropriations. Those were in 2 specific funds. the Behavioral Health Fund, and the Employer Contribution Reserve Fund. It's a compliance report, so you either comply or you don't. We have to note it. If you don't, it's also disclosed in Note 2 of the county's financial statements as well. In terms of our testing of compliance related to the federal grants, that resulted in no compliance findings. Throughout our procedures and throughout kind of the tail end of the audit, as we were reviewing the financial statements, we had a lot of discussion related to the over expenditures in the budget, and really identified that management is hyper aware of the compliance requirements there, and the requirement to monitor compliance throughout the year. So they obviously want those over expenditures to be zero, and that is the goal. And so I think, just with all of the different things that can happen during the year, you can accrue something at the end of the year and not have time to go and have that budget approved. Sometimes these things do happen, and we are required to report it. Next slide, please. The fourth question is, did the audit identify any fraud, waste, or abuse? And we do several items throughout the audit process that is procedures to evaluate the answer to this question. So we do evaluate those key controls, as I mentioned. We do a brainstorming session as an internal engagement team just to identify fraud-related risks. We identify people that we want to talk to specifically about fraud, if they know about any fraud. And then we also interview, we interview individuals throughout the county, but we also perform a surprise procedure. And this procedure is really identified based on discussions that we have internally, both at the engagement team level as well as throughout Moss Adams, to kind of keep management on their toes. We send them the same PBC listing, provided by client listing, PBC listing every single year. So this additional request or surprise procedure is really designed to keep them on their toes and help identify if there was any fraud, waste, or abuse during the year. As a result of all of our procedures, no instances were identified throughout the audit. Next slide, please. So the fifth question is, what the audit does not directly answer, and that's the county's financial condition. And Kevin is going to cover the next slide, please.
Thanks, Ashley. I'll go ahead and wrap this up. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
So years ago, the Government Accounting Standards Board wanted counties and cities to present numbers that were more like a commercial entity, and one measure of that is net positions. So we thought, given our short time, this is the one number to look at today. What net position is, if the county was to sell off all of its assets at net book value and then liquidate all of its liabilities, what would it have left over? And looking at the last 5 years, going back to 2016, be roughly somewhere between $900 million and $1 billion. And what you want to see here is stability. That's that dark bar in the graph is your total net position. And I think a good county is going to have good stability. Now, if you were like a Maricopa County down in Arizona, some of the Dakota counties that have those huge oil booms and questions about do they have the infrastructure in place to support that kind of growth, you probably want to see larger increases in that position. I think the Clackamas County's population growth has been more modest, so good stability here is a good sign. The other piece I want to address is the component of net position. Those are the three bars to the right, and far and away the largest piece is that yellow bar. That's what the county has invested over time in capital resources. So things like buildings, infrastructure, which is your highways, your bridges, and other capital assets. That also has good stability. In the U.S., we're hearing a lot of things about the need to replace long-time infrastructure as it depreciates over time. So I think if you saw a declining trend in that yellow bar, that would be a red flag, but the fact that you have good stability there, I think that's also a good sign for health. So Ashley and I don't have time today to go over all of the financial bars and graphs that we could throw at you, but we thought we had one. A net position is the best one to look at. So with that, we'll throw it back for any questions.
Any questions from my colleagues?
And just quickly, before there are any questions, just want to do a quick acknowledgement. Thank you to the county commissioners for all of your leadership. The audit committee, we meet with the audit committee regularly, really get to know them during the year. So really enjoy working with them. Gary, obviously, for his management expertise, Elizabeth for her leadership, and Krista for your technical knowledge and expertise. And then the county hired a controller, Cindy, she was great to work with, and just all personnel were just excellent to work with, very, very courteous and responsive, and we just really appreciated all of their efforts. It takes a village to get the audit completed, especially in a year with so many tragedies and so many things that went on at the county. So just thanks again to all of the individuals on this slide.
Okay, great. So any comments, questions? Seeing none. Gary, anything else, any other business for the day?
No decision point here. This was just an informational update, so thank you, Krista and the Moss Adams team, and that was your final item for today, Commissioners.
Great. We are adjourned.
There you go.